mercy on our souls. Stay away from the major sins. Ignore the whispers of the shayateen. Oh Lord, have mercy on our souls. Oh Lord, have mercy on our souls. Stay away from the major sins. Ignore the whispers. Oh Lord, have mercy on us. Have mercy on us all.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode of 26 Ways to Be a Good Muslim Parent. We've spoken about many things in the previous 19 episodes, and in this episode, number 20, we're speaking about a general principle. And this is the only episode in the series for which I'm not going to start by mentioning an ayah or a hadith, but I'm going to start by mentioning a principle. And this episode is all about building a bond with your children. A lot of people ask questions. My 5-year-old is like this, my 7-year-old is like this, my 9-year-old is like this, my 10-year-old is like this, my 11-year-old, my 13-year-old, my 15-year-old, my 20-year-old son, my 22-year-old daughter. And so what this episode is about is how to maintain, how to build, and how to maintain a bond with your children throughout the different phases of their life. And rather than mentioning to you an ayah or a hadith, I'm going to mention to you a qa'idah, a principle. And this principle, to the best of my knowledge, is not backed up by a hadith or an ayah, but it is generally supported by the texts of the Quran and the Sunnah, and it has general agreement as being a wise principle for parenting. And that is the principle, لَاعِبْهُ سَبْعًا ثُمَّ أَدِّبْهُ سَبْعًا ثُمَّ صَاحِبْهُ سَبْعًا لَاعِبْهُ سَبْعًا ثُمَّ أَدِّبْهُ سَبْعًا ثُمَّ صَاحِبْهُ سَبْعًا. And the principle in English goes something like this. Play with your child for 7 years. Then teach your child for 7 years. Then accompany your child and befriend your child for 7 years. And we say and we emphasize again that this is not a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but it's a well-accepted principle. And it gives us a whole number of benefits that we can talk about in this episode. The first is that the child's needs, as your child grows, change. What they need from you as a parent changes. And the kind of relationship that they have with you as a parent also changes. One of the mistakes people make in parenting is that people try to apply the way their child is at 5 years old with their child at 15 years old. And this is something about what we spoke about in the last episode. So not giving them any responsibility, not taking them seriously, not consulting them in things, because in their mind, there's no difference between the child being 5 or being 15. So the first thing we have to recognize is that children go through phases. Now the word sab'an, 7 years, is an approximation. It's not a wahi from Allah Azza wa Jal. It's not revelation from Allah Azza wa Jal. So we say this in an approximate sense. But in the early part of a child's life, what they need more than anything is learning through play. Learning through play, playing with you, building a bond with you, showing love and affection towards them. This kind of bond that you have in the early years of the child is very important. A lot of parents neglect, especially fathers, neglect the early part of their child's life. And I know particularly in certain countries, some fathers basically say, bring me the child when they are 7 or 8 years old. That's when I'm going to start paying attention to them. They're too young now, they cry, they scream, they throw up on me. You know, they go to the toilet in funny places and they wet their clothes and they wet the bed and all of this other stuff. You know, I don't really want to be involved in that. The thing is that your child forms so much at that age. The majority of what your child learns The fastest phase of learning, the fastest phase of development happens when your child is less than 7 years old. And so during these early years, whether it's 7 or 6 or 5, you spend that time building a bond with your child, playing with your child, having fun with your child, letting your child love you and show you affection, kissing them, showing them affection back, hugging them, spending time with them, playing with them. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of playing with your children. Again, a lot of people tend to be very standoff when it comes to playing with their children. You know, if their children are playing role-playing games, they don't really want to get involved. If their children are playing with cars, how many fathers and mothers are willing to get on the mat and drive the cars around the mat and go broom, broom and make different noises? But this is what builds a bond with your children. And you see the Prophet ﷺ in his life clearly playing with young children, showing affection to young children, bringing young children along with him, praying with a very young girl in his arms. He didn't have to pray with that young girl in his arms. He could have given that young girl to her mother. He could have put her on the side, but he chose to pray with her in his arms, to build that bond, build that relationship. And he played with young children. He was kind to them. He gave them nice words. Ya Aba Umair, ma fa'al al-Nughayr. O Abu Umair, what's happened to the little bird? Speaking to a young boy who had a little bird as a pet, and the bird died, and he noticed that the young boy didn't bring the bird anymore. Ya Aba Umair, ma fa'al al-Nughayr. O Abu Umair, what happened to that little bird? This kind of consideration, care for them, listening to them at that age and playing with them and building a bond with them at that age is absolutely vital. At that very young age, less than 7 years old. And even though it is an age of play, that doesn't mean there is no education in it. I think that is sometimes misunderstood from the principle that I mentioned. Play with them for 7 years and then teach them or educate them for 7 years and then accompany them for 7 years. It's often misunderstood by people that that means there is no education less than 7 years. That can't be true, because at 7 years old we begin to command our children to pray, and we have to teach them how to pray before they reach that age. You can't command a child to pray the day they turn 7 if they don't know how to pray. Rather, you need to teach them how to pray before then. So there's a lot of things that our children will learn. But what is their primary vehicle for learning at that age? Their primary vehicle for learning at the age of younger than 7 years old, their primary vehicle for learning is play. Playing, enjoying themselves, having fun, learning through fun. And that's, if you take them to school, that's what they do with kids that are less than 7 years old. They mostly teach them learning through play. In some countries in the world, they don't even send children to school until they're 7 years old. Some Scandinavian countries, last time I looked, they don't send children to school until they are 7 years old. Because primarily the belief is that the child benefits the most at that young age through play, learning through play, learning through copying, not through sitting with a book and writing out 50 pages, but through copying, through playing, through enjoying themselves, and then bit by bit, you gradually increase the amount of learning. I also think it's important to note at this point that it's not the case that the child is doing the same amount of play for the whole 7 years. Rather, the child, when they are very young, is playing more than anything else. I mean, a little baby is just playing with their hands and feet. That's pretty much what they're doing. As they get older, playing with other things, etc. But as they start to get older, so yeah, we give them some little education books to do, some counting to do, but we try not to bore them. We try not to make them feel like it's anything other than just the variation between periods of play and periods of having fun, a little bit of work, and work can be fun too. And we try to make their exercise books fun. We try to make their learning fun at that young age. And then we start to see a difference when the child reaches 7 years old. We see a difference in the sunnah, because the Prophet ﷺ said, command your child to pray from 7 and discipline them if they do not pray from 10. So 7 years old represents a change in your child's life. According to the Sunnah, represents a change. Now your child is going from simply knowing about the prayer, role play, copying mom and dad as they pray, going sometimes to the masjid, to the age where the child is coming to every single prayer. Boy or girl, the girl is going with the mom and the boy going to the masjid with the dad. 5 times a day, including Fajr. So this is a different phase in their life. We're going to continue this discussion with some more practical examples and get on to the latter phase, inshallah, in the second half of this episode. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Stay away from the major sins. Ignore the whispers of the shaitan.
I'm your brother in Islam, Hussein Yi from Malaysia, and you are watching Peace TV, the solution for humanity.
Explore the options. Match the qualities. Assure the success.
What happens at school, or more specifically, what happens inside the classroom. Good qualities of classrooms: interactive, challenging, collaborative, distributive focus, student-centered. Let's together examine the quality of education that is provided to our children. To judge this quality precisely, join me on Peace TV.
Join Dr. Muhammed in Teaching at School every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 4 p.m. and repeat telecast at 2:30 a.m. Saudi Arabia on Peace TV.
Say indeed, my prayers, my sacrifice, my life and my death are all for Allah, sustainer of the world.
A dynamic.
I challenge any human being to point out a single fundamental of Islam
In youthful quest.
Which is against humanity as a whole.
Iconic, inspiring, encouraging.
don't judge Islam based on the following.
Farik Naik.
Judge Islam based on the authentic sources, that's the glorious Quran and the authentic Hadith.
Son of the world-famous orator on Islam and comparative religion, Dr. Zakir Naik.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us an opportunity to do a prophet job and to earn a prophet reward.
A star above par in Teens Star. Next on Peace TV.
Stay away from the major sins. Ignore the whispers of the shaitan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back. We're talking about the fundamental principle that is well accepted among Muslims, and that principle is the principle regarding parenting. Play with your children for 7 years, teach them and educate them for 7 years, and then accompany them for 7 years. This is a general rule, it's not an absolute. Children play at all ages. Children older than 14 years play all the time. But the early part of their life is characterized through playing, learning through playing, and the latter part of their life, the middle part of their life as a child, is characterized by education, by discipline, by learning. That doesn't mean you don't play, doesn't mean you don't go out together, of course you do, but it means that the primary phase is learning and discipline. And we said that that doesn't mean you don't learn when you're older. You learn a lot when you're older, but it means that your primary phase of learning from your mom and dad, taking discipline, character, taking morals and manners, is primarily between the age of 7 and 14. Leading up to puberty. If we say that the standard age for puberty as a standard is 14 or 15 years old. Once they reach the age of adulthood, your child at this point really doesn't feel as though they need to learn from their parents often. or feels as though they have their own decisions and their own feelings. You know, the terrible teens, the teenage years where they start to feel that they know better and that their parents don't. But if you as a parent plan for that appropriately, then actually it's no big deal and you can handle it just fine. Primarily playing with your child when they're younger, experiences through play, learning through play. As they start to get towards 7 years old, there's a little bit more discipline, there's a little bit more education, and you try to form your child's adulthood and them becoming an adult by disciplining and teaching and educating them and instilling within them morals and manners between the age of 7 and 14 years old. And these ages are just approximations. And it's really important. If you look at the prayer, how does teaching the prayer begin? Teaching the prayer begins through play and role model. Copying mom and dad, having play. You know, sajda is just a game where we bow our heads on the floor and run around and then bow them on the floor again. 2 years old, 3 years old. By 4 years old, maybe they can stand for 2-3 raka'ah without running around and maybe copy some, even though they tend to look around a little bit. And maybe if they get distracted by something interesting, they'll run off. Still learning by play. 5, 6 years old, now the child is starting to learn their du'as a little bit. You know, it's all very fun, but they're learning the tashahhud, they're learning Surah Fatiha, they're having a lot of fun doing it, they don't see it to be a big chore. Then it gets to 7 and now it's a case of come and pray with me. You have to pray. The child is praying properly before 7 years old, full number of raka'ah, without staring, without running around, without looking up at the ceiling and down again. And then the child is told to come and pray 5 times a day. Sometimes the child will answer. Sometimes they'll go back to their life before 7 years old and not answer you and not listen. That's okay. By the time they get to 10 years old, turns up a notch again. And that means that the child is now disciplined if they do not pray 5 times a day. Now tell me, 10 years old, is any 10-year-old child required to pray? Very, very rare that someone reaches adulthood by 10 years old. Extremely rare. Does happen, but extremely, extremely rare that a child would reach 10 years old and be an adult required to pray. So in general, at this age, the child is doing something before they need to do it. They're being disciplined, they're being told off, they're being grounded or shouted at or whatever for not praying at 10 years old, even though they don't need to pray yet. And that's because you're preparing them. You're developing the habit of praying when you can still develop a habit. It's really tough to develop a habit within a 15-year-old child. It's really tough to develop a habit within a 17-year-old child, or 17-year-old adult, we should say. But as for developing a habit with a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old, the younger you get, the easier it becomes to develop that habit once they reach an age of relative maturity, let's say 7 years old. Before that, it's hard to develop a habit because they're just too immature. At 7, between 7 and 10, it's really easy to develop the habit of praying 5 times a day. By the time they reach the age of 10, it now becomes obligatory for them to pray 5 times a day, and they are disciplined if they don't. By the time they reach 14, they've been praying 5 times a day for 7 whole years. Think about that. Let's just say they reach puberty at the average age of 15. 7 years they've been praying 5 times a day. For the last 4 of those 7 years, they've been disciplined if they miss a prayer. So easy for them. All of the problems of my teenager doesn't want to pray, most of them, 90% of them, are completely gone. Because we took that key phase in that child's life and we recognized that the child goes through different phases. I want to play, I want to role model, I want to copy, to I want to learn, to I'm ready for discipline, to adulthood. Phases they go through. And now we come to the final phase. وَصَاحِبْهُ سَبْعًا. Your child, when they reach the age of being an adult, is not ready for you to simply cut the rope and say, off you go. Very rarely is a child mature enough at 14 or at 13 or at 15 to say to that child, off you go, walk away. you have nothing now, you have learned everything you're going to learn from me. But the way that you teach a child who has reached adulthood is different to the way that you teach a child before that. And this is something I feel a lot of parents really struggle with. My 15-year-old doesn't want to listen to me. Probably because you're not teaching them in the right way. Saying that the phase of teaching is between 7 and 14 doesn't mean that you stop teaching them at 15. But what it does mean is that you are willing to change the method that you teach them, to approach things in a different way. How do you approach things in a different way? It's based upon companionship and friendship. So you've built a bond with your children. You played with them when they were little. You taught them when they were a little older. You disciplined them as they reached adulthood. And when they reached adulthood, the most important thing is for you to maintain a friendship and a close relationship with them. And if I have seen anything from the families that I respect for their tarbiyah, and my children have not reached the age of adulthood yet, but those families who I really respect that the tarbiyah they've done for their children, the way they've brought their children up, the number one thing that I would say that you see from that child or those children is that you see from them that when they reach adulthood, they are friends with their parents. And someone would say, well, friendship isn't going to save my child from having a girlfriend or a boyfriend. Friendship isn't going to save my child from ruining their life. Friendship isn't save my child from dropping out of school. You'd be very surprised. Friendship means they're open with you, they're honest with you, they tell you what they're feeling, they take your advice, you take their advice, you consult them, they consult you. If that's the case at that age, then you have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, inshallah, that yes, your children will make mistakes. Your teenagers will make mistakes like we made mistakes when we were teenagers. But at the end of the day, inshallah, those mistakes will not be of a serious nature because you have that friendship with them. You ask any parent, nobody would want their children to do something haram. But if they did do something haram, would you rather they told you about it and were open with you, or would you rather they concealed it from you and they went and did something really serious? Most parents would say, well, I'd rather my child was open with me and I can help them to solve it. But you have to work on that relationship. You have to be a friend. You cannot lecture your child at 15 like you lectured them at 7. At 15, now you have to respect your child as an adult. They have their own decisions. They are mukallaf. They're required in Islam. And they're forced, the good deeds are counted for them, the bad deeds are counted against them. Jannah and hellfire is now a serious two-way struggle. You can't just point a finger and say, do this and don't do this anymore. Now, that's not to say you don't tell your children what to do. That's a given that, at 15, you still tell them, do this and don't do this. But your role moves away from the disciplining parent and teacher towards the friend and the companion. I'm there for you. You have some problems, I'm here for you. You need me, you know where I am. And let your child be an adult. Let them grow up. Let them have their fun. Let them even make mistakes, as long as this is something that doesn't harm them Islamically and it's not too serious Islamically. Or even when it is, you're not aware of it, you do your best to stop it before it happens. But if your child makes mistakes, they make mistakes. But you as a companion are there now to be a friend, somebody who they love and they trust, and somebody who, even if things go really bad, let's take worst case scenario, they go off the rails, they'll still come back to you because that friendship is there, nice and strong, and you can help them to work over it, help them to repent, and help them to change their life. So this is just a few words of advice to myself and then to you, as a parent to a parent, on how we can manage the different phases of the life of our children and how we have to become different parents when our children are little, to when our children are of a medium age, to when our children become adults. We have to be a different kind of parent. We have to be the playful friend. We have to be the playful teacher. We have to be the serious teacher. We have to be the person of discipline. And we have to be the companion and the friend and the advisor. A parent, you have to play all of these roles. And the real hikmah is knowing when to play each particular role, when to take a particular stance. And it's slow changes rather than solid. It's not the day that they become 7, everything changes. The day they become 15, everything changes. But it's more a case of slow and sensible, gradual changes as you see your child changing. And of course, that's all about having your hands on the reins and having hold of and control of your child's upbringing. That's all we have time for. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Stay away from the major sins. Ignore the whispers of the shayateens. Oh Lord, have mercy on our souls. Stay away from the major sins. Ignore the whispers of the shayateens. Oh Lord, have mercy on our souls. Oh Lord, have mercy on our souls. Have mercy on our souls. Stay away from the major sins. Ignore the whispers of the shayateens. Oh Lord.